A relationship with the right referral partner could be a game changer for any B2B company. So what if you could reverse engineer these relationships at a moment's notice? Start a podcast, invite potential referral partners to be guests on your show, and grow your referral network faster than ever. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
Welcome back to the B2B Growth Show. Today we are joined by Jeffrey Palermo. Jeffrey is the Chief Architect and CEO at Clear Measure. Jeffrey, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks. Great to be here.
It's a pleasure to connect with you. I'm looking forward to picking your brain because today we're actually going to be talking about this. Today's topic is why every company is a software company. And then even more important than that possibly is, and how to do it. So I think it's going to be a fantastic topic for today. But Jeffrey, before we get into all that, maybe you can tell us a little bit about what you and your team at Clear Measure are up to.
Sure. Well, I've been in the computer programming business since 1997 and really been a computer programmer my entire career. So that's 21 years if you're counting at this point, and still loving it. And, some stats that have been going out is that just recently is released that 5% of the world's GDP is technology spend, and it's expected to go up to 10% of world GDP by 2030. So those kinds of numbers are pretty staggering, and we certainly see that in our business. But at Clear Measure, we're Austin, Texas headquartered. We're a national reach company, a Microsoft Gold partner, and we focus on Microsoft platform custom software for the non-technology company market. And these are companies that are in normally traditional industries. They don't sell technology, but they realize they've had to make use of custom software in order to compete in the marketplace. And so we do two things for them. One is if they build their team internally, then we help them build their team and enable their team for high quality and high throughput. And if strategically they don't want to hire a staff internally, then we build and enable a turnkey team within Clear Measure dedicated to them. So that's our business.
Wow, that's very cool. And I know that at Clear Measure you are a growing company. You're fantastic at what you do. You're on the Inc. 5000 list, which is all I think speaking towards your level of expertise and passion. And one of the reasons that we're so thrilled to have you on the show. And, today's topic, why every company is a software company and how to do it. This was a tailor-picked topic by you. So Jeffrey, kind of, where are we starting? I know you have this idea that it's not enough to hire developers. Is that kind of where our jumping off point today?
Yeah, the premise, and Forbes magazine wrote an article, I think that got a lot of traction back in 2011, and the title of that article was "Now Every Company is a Software Company." And so everybody out in the business world has been talking about this for a long time, and pretty much every company of any certain size is agreed that they have to do something with custom software in order to compete because their competitors are doing it and getting benefits from it. And so I'll share some things that we're seeing with enterprise companies, but also the mid-market is our sweet spot. That's our market. And so what we see there is companies that are in logistics or manufacturing or finance, insurance, or legal, where these are B2B companies themselves. And so their clients have long-term contracts, and it's all about how much monthly sales are running through these contract vehicles. So a daily throughput is really what drives their revenue. It's not the sales organizations, not e-commerce like Amazon, or it's not software sales companies that we're talking about here. We're talking about companies where, like on the big end, UPS and FedEx, the number of packages that they can deliver every day is going to be a driving force of their revenue. Mm-hmm. If they have a low productivity day, they can't catch up. And so that's the nature of these types of B2B companies, where every day matters. And if you have a really bad day, you can't just catch up the next day and do twice as much, because you have a certain capacity, you have a certain throughput. And so in this type of organization, whether it be legal services or insurance servicing or manufacturing, you have a certain capacity. You want your people to be very efficient every day, and these companies are turning to custom software in order to achieve that. And one common thing, the very first thing that this type of company does is hire some developers. And maybe they've started out 10 years ago by having an outsourced firm build a piece of software for them. Well, now it's there to manage the source code. And so they've realized, you know what, we really need to have a developer or two on staff on the small end, and even several dozen on the large end. What I'm not specifically going to comment on today is the enterprise space, because they're already at a scale where they have everything in-house. Yeah. And they're doing fine. They've got top talent, and they've been through this and had to figure it out. But the non-technology companies that hire developers, but don't say hire a chief architect or have a dedicated CIO or CTO, in these organizations, possibly the chief operating officer and sometimes the CEO themselves is overseeing the development organization. And in those types of environments, the same struggles exist when all you do is hire developers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I appreciate that. You're kind of making that distinction between the enterprise level companies that obviously they've got their ducks in a row, they've got the resources, and we're talking a little bit more mid market. So that's a great jumping off point. Talking, and that's not just enough to hire these developers. And Jeffrey, I think you've touched on it a little bit, but even more specifically, like sort of what types of software then can we build?
Sure. From a usage perspective, the most common type of software is an online integrated system that the own company's employees use in order to be effective every day. And so as an example, if there's, UPS and FedEx, everybody's heard of those, but there are so many delivery companies out there, from regular parcel to specialized food delivery companies and warehousing companies and materials delivery companies. And it's the same problem there. It's, I want to deliver the most dollars of product, and oftentimes it's the most pounds of product per mile driven. And so efficient packing of the trucks, splitting out the orders by the trucks, the routes that are taken, the schedules that are taken, knowing which customers have a flexible delivery window and which customers have to have their stuff delivered exactly on time. Mm-hmm. That is so much information across all these daily orders. And oftentimes, at midnight, the trucks are being loaded up for delivery the next morning at 6 a.m. And a lot of, delivery to restaurants. Restaurants require daily food deliveries, and the food has to be fresh and cold. And so for the longest time, before computers, there were manual methods to figure out what orders to put on the trucks and the routes. And now it's all done with software and these algorithms that can do trial and error and testing on all kinds of different options. And even a question of, okay, let's do an experiment of putting one extra truck that's not quite full, but does that actually help things in some areas because of traffic patterns? And with the availability through APIs of traffic patterns and roads, I mean, there's so much information that can be crunched to really make that absolutely efficient and compete. But really, this type of software is used by the company's own internal employees so that they are better at what they do for their own customers and can drive down their costs. What we're not talking about is building software to sell it. Yeah. So what we find here is that, let me give you an analogy of the workforce. So there's some statistic out there published by Stack Overflow on relative experience levels. And most of to the tune of 80% of the software development workforce is younger than 30 years old. And if most of them have a 4-year degree, there's going to be some that don't, but if most of them do, then that's 8 years experience. But about half of those are younger than 26 years old. So that takes it down to 4 years of doing this trade. Somebody like me, if you've been in this over 20 years, statistically, there's only I think between 7 and 9% of the industry that's actually been in this field for more than 20 years. And so it's not that the older people have gotten out of the field in a disproportionate way. It's that the tremendous growth over the last few decades has caused a huge influx from an entry point. And so that's where the percentages lie. And so Google and Facebook and Microsoft, they are going to get a really good percentage of people coming out of and they recruit at the colleges. And so you take let's say a $1 billion mid-market company that is in a traditional industry, and maybe they've developed some software over the years, but they really need to have a better capability internally. Mm-hmm. They have no track record of being able to recruit at universities or know how and what type of developer to hire. They just don't have that track record like the pure technology companies do. So they're at a disadvantage. And so they hire the developers that they've hired. And they're going to hire smart people, but it's a type of person. Let me give you an example. Let's say you want to open a mechanic shop that's going to do oil changes, tire changes, and the basic maintenance. And every town has these. And so you get a great location, you build a brand new building, you go to the local mechanics school and say, all right, next month you have a graduating class. I want only your top 10%. I'm going to pay them better than any other competitor. I'm going to hire the top 10% of your graduating class. And you go to the local Snap-on vendor and you get a couple of crates of the finest tools and you equip these people. All right. So now a couple days before opening day, they all show up and you have these crates of brand new tools. You got this brand new building, perfect location, really smart, trained graduates, brand new, these mechanics. And you say, okay, in a few days, the customer is going to come. Let's get ready. And they all look at each other because no one was ever trained in how to set up the environment for themselves. They were trained in an environment that was set up for them by people who have been in the industry for decades. That's the situation that we are in the software world today.
Wow. That's a sort of a brilliant example, sort of setting a context for kind of what you're talking about. So I appreciate it because obviously a lot of this stuff is not necessarily the kind of industry, the kind of business that I do. So having that example makes it very clear. And this is kind of to your point about managing then, I think, development the same that you would any other department. Is that kind of correct?
Yes, because it's high tech. Some people look at it and say, well, I don't know how this is done. So let's just ask the developers and let's just take it at face value. But again, these developers, you know what? They are really, really smart at the technologies that they've been trained in. But most of the workforce has not been trained to set up the environment for themselves for high productivity. And if the listeners have ever been or studied the Empire State Building, that's a perfect example because here's a skyscraper built on time, on budget. Not a single worker was fatally injured in this skyscraper construction. And in any kind of construction, you hear about injuries and fatalities, especially in the 1930s. And so you had the architects, Shreve, Lamb, and Harmon and Associates, and those people designed a beautiful building, but few people know the group that was actually behind this brilliant project that erected 4.5 stories per day for over a year to actually keep the process going in a high quality and efficient manner. Nobody's heard of the Starrett brothers and Econ Group. They were the general contractors, and they created an environment and a process that created the quality to begin with. And with quality comes speed. And so in any kind of process, you can design a software system, and software architects can do technology selection and the shape of it. And you can have the developers, and the developers are the skilled craftsmen, the skilled tradespeople that actually need to do the software development. But you need the corollary of that general contractor to create an environment and to instill and operate a process so that you bake quality in from the beginning, and then have that throughput. A lot of people want to go fast. They want to have speed in the process and high throughput. But if you go after speed, then you end up getting bogged down because you're fixing problems and you're having to stop, and you don't ever achieve quality. And so, but in the software world, research has shown us, and it's published in Capers Jones's work, that instead, if we go after quality first and achieve quality, speed comes for free after. And so it's an order of priority, because if you eliminate all the mistakes, if you build quality, and lean manufacturing kind of proved this, the Toyota production system, one of their premises is you build quality in from the beginning and you achieve quality. And because they have achieved quality, they are fast. And the same thing happens in software. And so that's what the mindset needs to be. And if any listeners are an executive overseeing a software team in a non-technology company where you don't have chief architect or a director of development that's already done this, if you just have a group of developers, really think about the development process as any other environment, any other department in your company, where you can have good people, but the process makes all the difference. And in today's day and age, we had Agile since 2001, and that was a big step forward. And now with the cloud, we've sprouted DevOps methods that kind of build on top of the manifesto for Agile development. And so for people who have really implemented Agile and have added on the DevOps methods, they're seeing that those types of processes are really giving them the quality that yields the speed and productivity they're looking for.
I love that. Yeah, putting the quality first and having the speed sort of follow in line. So, and one of these, Jeffrey, one of the last things I think we were going to also touch on is kind of the idea of, in the framework of this process, and thinking about how you would manage the development in like any other department, and the kind of this idea of what happens then if you don't have this department manager.
Well, you need to find the leadership somewhere. Again, it doesn't help much to have workers unless you have an effective leader that is orchestrating the work in a cohesive direction. Otherwise, you're not going to accomplish your objectives. It's the same thing with a sales force. You can hire a bunch of salespeople and just dispense with the sales manager and say, okay, salespeople, go sell. And you have a lot of people that are just having a lot of conversations, and you may sell a lot, but your company's getting pulled in tons of different directions because it's not cohesive. And so any department is going to flounder without an effective leader. And so one of the things that we help a lot with is helping companies find that process and to equip their leader with a process that can keep all the developers going in the same direction and achieve quality, and then the speed just comes for free. But everything hinges on leadership. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, as with many things, it does, and there is that trickle down effect with effective leadership and having your teams and your departments aligned. So, Jeffrey, this is. I'm thrilled to have you talking about this stuff, because some of it is definitely beyond me, but you've made this topic very approachable, lots of real world examples and parallels and analogies, which is brilliant for me. I hope it's also going to be brilliant for our listeners. And obviously with Clear Measure, you've been doing some fantastic things. You've got a vision. You've been in the business, as you said, for over 20 years. And this is a question that we've been asking a lot of our guests that are in these positions of leadership, are leading companies. It's this idea of legacy. And, I was wondering if you could share with us kind of what kind of legacy you were hoping to leave behind at the end of the day, whether that is personal, professional, or even a combination of the two.
Sure. Well, there was one of our executive advisors passed away recently, and it kind of brought it home. His name was John Padgett, and among other roles, he was the CEO of GE Access probably about 20 years ago. And he's going to later in life, he become an executive coach. And so we had engaged him for a number of years, and he passed away just last month. And so that kind of brought it home for me. And he certainly had just so many people at his funeral talking about how better off they were and their lives were for having had John in their life. And that's the legacy that I want to live. And certainly that funeral was not a funeral. It was a celebration of his life. Mm-hmm. And so that's the legacy that I want to leave, is that other people are better off for having bumped into me, and that I poured into other people, and that I served other people, and they benefited because either our paths crossed or we got to know each other more deeply. So I would say that's the legacy that I want to leave.
Yeah, absolutely, Jeffrey. I mean, that certainly would be a beautiful legacy, and we definitely wish you continued success achieving that. Certainly, continued success with Clear Measure. And thank you again so much for your time. If any of our listeners are interested in connecting with you after today's episode, they want to find out more about today's topic. They want to find out more about Clear Measure. They want to talk to you. What's the best way for them to go about doing that?
Sure. My email address is Jeffrey at clear-measure.com. You can go on the website, clear-measure.com. Also, I'm on Twitter at Jeffrey Palermo. And if you just do a Google search for Jeffrey Palermo, I'm pretty easy to find.
Well, fantastic. Jeffrey, again, thank you so much for your time. It really was a pleasure getting to interview you today.
No, my pleasure indeed.
There are lots of ways to build a community, and we've chosen to build the B2B growth community through this podcast. But because of the way podcasts work, it's really hard to engage with our listeners. And without engagement, it's tough to build a great community. So here's what we've decided to do. We're organizing small dinners across the country with our listeners and guests. No sales pitches, no agenda, just great conversations with like-minded people. We'll talk business, we'll talk family, we'll talk goals and dreams. We'll build friendships. So if you'd like to be a part of a B2B growth dinner in a city near you, go to b2bgrowthdinners.com. That's b2bgrowthdinners.com. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.